This podcast is brought to you by DoorDash. Use offer code MORE, that's MOORE 50, MORE 50 to get more from delivery for less with Dash Pass. And then it is also brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by one of those guests that I think needs very little introduction with how often he has been on, especially over the past, you're really racking them up. And it's because, though, so often this guest is really exposed to all of the things happening in gaming hardware news very closely, and I feel is outspoken in a way where we can really speak freely, and that's actually very rare to find. I mean, I would mention people like you, people like maybe Brian Heemskirk, or certainly other people like Wendell, who's not a game dev, but, someone who's willing to say whatever they think and also get their hands dirty testing stuff that's making news in gaming hardware. But so either way, though, for people who haven't heard an episode with you before, please introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are just to make sure. But then also, please, I'm inclined to ask why you think you're so often investigative about issues in gaming hardware and why you're so outspoken compared to, I would say, a lot of other people in this space.
Hi, so I'm Matt, founder of Alderon Games. Been doing games for over 10 years now, and we made a game called Path of Titans. It's a dinosaur survival game. So I guess the reason why I'm so outspoken is because I'm an indie dev, and I'm kind of self-funded. So all our games are self-funded, through our company and through our players. So I really look at our players as being above any of these other companies we work with. Like when we sell our video game, we're not selling to Sony, we're selling to the consumer directly, right? Sony just happens to be the platform people are playing on, for example. But the relationship I care about is directly with our customers. So if our customer is having an issue or a crash or a bug or, for example, Raptor Lake defect, mass Raptor Lake failures, that affected us really personally, and most game devs would, I guess, answer it quietly and not rock any boats and try to get Intel to replace CPUs in the background. But I kind of want to speak about this just so because I can, because a lot of freedom. A lot of people, for example, if they have a problem with their game publisher, they can't just speak out about it freely without getting into major trouble. So there's some things I kind of can't say, but we're pretty free here on the show.
Yeah, and I would say I'll include we'll have a pop-up for the Raptor Lake failure Broken Silicon you're on. I'd heavily recommend that people listen to that episode as well. But I guess just kind of as a follow-up question too, because my guess is that there's no way to really get around this just being the status quo, but like, what is there anything that you think could change in the games industry that would make it so that developers did feel free to be far more outspoken? Because I think compared to really almost any other, I don't know, I guess you see this anywhere, right? Where if someone has a partner or depends on a product to make their product, they want to kind of, tiptoe around what they say for obvious relationship reasons. But like, man, especially with game developers who I feel should feel somewhat free, what do you think would make it so that game devs feel more able to be outspoken? Would the culture just change? Would it have to be they can't take us all out at once? Or I don't know, I'm kind of starting to ramble here. What do you think?
Yeah, so a good example of this one's Apple, right? So Apple had a lawsuit from Epic Games where they were taking 30% off in-app purchases, and Epic kind of lost $1 billion suing them over many years, right? So Epic's talking really bad about Apple and saying, hey, anti-competitive and things like that. As a standard dev, if you speak out against Apple, they're like, shame if something happened in your app in app review, shame if a delay happens, right? So you're always on edge against other companies because it's not that they're going to publicly come out and say something bad about you. You might have something happen to your game, like maybe it doesn't get covered by a game journalist, or maybe it doesn't. You don't get extra support from Sony when you need it, or maybe your app review takes longer. So there's a fear of other companies and being open, but there's also fear from customers as well. So you'll have this where, if you have a problem with the Ubisoft game, for example, you don't speak to like a direct employee of Ubisoft. Usually you're talking to like, someone that's like not really public identity and things like that. So there's concerns from the consumer side of you upset customers, they come after you kind of thing publicly. I mean, people get canceled based on what they post on social media, right? But if you can imagine the extreme version of that when you're talking against a company, it's a lot bigger fear. And unless game developers can kind of free up their funding and be more independent, which is very hard to do because making games is really expensive and the costs of games are going up. But if more games can kind of self-publish and be independent, I do anticipate more game devs speaking up. But with the Raptor Lake thing, for example, Warframe spoke up and said, hey, we're seeing these Intel failures too. And a bunch of other devs spoke up too. And that kind of enabled me to bat a charge into this Raptor Lake thing. And so when I spoke about it first, and other people spoke about it as well before me, we kind of created a safe space for the other game developers to come in and say, I'm having this too, and they're not the only person calling this one out. So it's kind of but what do you think?
No, yeah, but something I'm just thinking about too is like in like the movie industry, like it's common that you'll see actors or directors be very outspoken about how a studio treated them and like it. And I'm wondering, like, a lot of that is probably because that director is old, retiring, doesn't care anymore. And games are much younger than movies. And so maybe we're not quite to a cycle where we have our crusty 70, 80-year-old or older, right? Ridley Scotts and stuff who just don't care anymore, say whatever they want. You're starting to see a little bit with like, I think Yoshida, right? He just retired from PlayStation or something, and he's now going on a tour saying what he thinks. But I still think that there's this air of, I wonder if you think it is because of how young the games industry is, or there would be a reason someone making movies would be less scared to just go, oh, yeah, NBC screwed me or something. Whereas a game maker, even after they retire, would probably just be like, oh, everything was actually perfect, even though, it obviously wasn't. I mean, an obvious example I have actually is like, I guess Kojima's been pretty open about how Konami treated him. But even then, the way the rumors are that he was treated, you'd think he'd be much more inflammatory than just some hotshot director in Hollywood who just talks crap about Universal or something.
Yeah, the PlayStation exec Yoshida, I actually pitched my game to them at some point while they're still at Sony. I remember talking to them. It's nice that they're outspoken. It seems a lot of the point they're being outspoken about are like pro PlayStation kind of points. So it's hard to really
see what I
get
mean? It doesn't feel like, and maybe he is happy, right? And maybe that's why. But you'd think there'd be one thing that he would say that's critical once he has nothing to lose.
Like it'd be someone from leaving Nintendo and them being critical about Nintendo, like that I can respect. But if it's kind of like these talking points, like maybe genuinely believes these things, but if it's these talking points of like, I worked at PlayStation and Xbox Game Pass is killing games and PlayStation's going to be great or whatever. Like I don't see that as really being outspoken. Mm-hmm. You really need for speaking out on Raptor, like we could have just quietly not said anything, right? And all that speaking out will do is damage our relationship with Intel. But for the greater good, you have to look kind of long-term thinking. With the movie executives, for example, a lot of them have a lot of money, well entrenched in the industry.
True. They probably have a lot more money. Yeah.
You can probably compare it to Tim Sweeney speaking out. So I really respect Tim Sweeney, but it's very easy for him to speak out and say, hey, Apple's being abusive when they have $1 billion to spend on a lawsuit, right? Indie developer might not better speak out so much, right? So I'm happy that Tim did speak out about this, but it is also very easy to speak out when you have a lot of backing behind you. So if game developers can team up, we can hopefully see more of this, but it's a difficult problem to solve.
That's the obvious thing. I guess you just said it. A lot of these examples I gave in Hollywood, they have so much more money half the time that's probably what gives them that confidence in the back end to say whatever they want once they retire. And I imagine that will change over time as video gaming continues to mature, and there are these super successful people that retire. But all right, we're kind of dancing around PlayStation here. One of the main reasons I wanted to have you on, I want to jump right into it. So you messaged me, or at least pointed me to some public articles about this, and I know that you are investigating PlayStation 5 failures, which includes some PlayStation 5 Pros. And this isn't something I've really followed. I see headlines pop up all the time. Xbox issue this, Joy-Con drift issue that. And I pretty much don't click most of the time until it pops up a bunch of times. So I don't really know much about this, the PlayStation 5, liquid metal thermal paste issue. Please explain what you've been seeing. Please explain.
Sure. So it all started with players contacting us for help. So they'll go on our Discord and they'll say, "Hey, Matt, my game crashes. Please help me." For this one, it was, your game is killing my console and it's shutting down. And it only happens in your game, Path of Titans. Like, what's going on? Like, it was worse since the last update. What are you guys doing to the game? Like that kind of discussion. Some of the players show up and they say, "Hey, I'm crashing in Ark as well, and I'm crashing in other games." But this is like a forced power off shutdown. So your PlayStation's working, you're playing the game, maybe you're 2 hours in or 15 minutes in, and the console acts kind of like you pulled power, as in someone like unplugged it while you're playing, even though it's still plugged in. And so normally you'd think, oh, it's just 2 or 3 people. Maybe they have dust in their console. Maybe, who knows what happened to their console kind of thing. And so you ask the players like, "Hey, can you clean your console?" And you're like, "Okay, I cleaned it. I cleaned out the fan and the dust and stuff like that." And it's like, "Can you deep clean your console? Can you pull it apart and disassemble into pieces and clean the power supply vent and clean all these other areas that are kind of hard to get to?" And they said they were still having these shutdowns, right? And kind of the newest update to our game was making it worse. What I did was I kind of pinned the thread on Discord, and a whole bunch more people showed up, right? And so I'm like, how many people just thought it was just them and it's only one PlayStation, just like the Raptor Lake situation? You don't really know how bad it is until you start correlating the stuff together. So I posted an announcement on our game's Discord. She's getting PS5 shutdowns in any game, including our game. And we had about 20 to 30 people show up the next day. And so now we've had hundreds of people show up, right? We also had 4 people in our own dev team and customer support team had their own PlayStations die as well of the same thing. And so far, we're trying to track it down and figure out what's going on. But it's looking like the liquid metal in the PS5, which a lot of people store vertically, is kind of escaping a little bit, and it's leaving dry spots on the APU. And
you believe setting your PlayStation up vertically, which I believe cools better, right?
Yeah. So Sony says put it vertical, even though it may be the worst thing for your console. And these consoles can take, 2 years or 4 years or 6 months to fail. But it's a bit of a luck thing and a bit of a physics thing and a bit of a how hot your PlayStation's running, where the liquid metal's going. There were some early reports and fears about it escaping, but some people kind of debunked it as like, "Oh, it's probably not, it's probably fine." But increasingly more and more, I'm seeing more consoles. And for example, Connor on our dev team, he pulled his PlayStation up and there was barely any liquid metal there. It's barely covering the APU. And so he would crash in 5 minutes in Call of Duty. And this is like an unopened console, so this is not
and you're not a Call of Duty dev, so it's not like it's just your game or something.
And so, we opened a support ticket with Sony. I can't go into too much detail about what Sony's saying, but, both Sony and I are concerned about it, and both, I spoke to a YouTube channel called Tronic6, who's kind of been covering this issue for quite a while. And we'll
link in the description to them, too.
We can link some popular videos. And he's seeing mass PS5 failures on his side, too. So the reason why it's concerning is all these launch models that are the early versions, they fail in much higher rates. But the PS Slim and Pro also fail, too. And the interesting thing is Sony tried to fix this issue by adding ridges into the APU and the heatsink to try to keep the liquid metal from going all over the place.
You saying it's much more likely, maybe even exclusively, it comes from putting your console vertical versus horizontal makes complete sense, because if you think it's a CPU or APU soldered to a board. If it's horizontal, well, the liquid metal's probably most likely just going to sit under the heatsink and not go anywhere as easily. I mean, it could still maybe leak a little. We've seen this with gigabyte graphics cards too, by the way, recently. But if you put it vertical, yeah, it can maybe just drip down over time, lose all of it.
Pulls at the very bottom, yeah. And so some people have said that putting it horizontal fixes it, but for some people, their console's so badly gone that it doesn't fix it, right? And the chat I had with Sony, at least on my side that I can share, is, first of all, looking at like software of like, hey, when did this start happening? Was it an update we did? Was it an update Sony did? And so we've been looking into that, but we kind of narrowed it down to the more graphically demanding our game gets, the more shutdowns we get. So The update we had from a year ago that wasn't very graphically demanding had almost no shutdowns. And so the update from 6 months ago, maybe 1% of our users had shutdowns. The update from, a few weeks back, we're now at like 2 or 3%, which is not a lot, but also millions of consoles.
Okay, so 2 to 3%. And I mean, again, it's not Call of Duty, but that's definitely a good enough sample size to tell you, oh no, does this mean 3% of PS5s are going to fail? Which is enough to be a lot.
And be out of warranty, right? And it's not just that your PS5 has failed and you need to repair it. It's that it's a launch model and out of warranty. And that might cause a user to quit our game, but they also might think our game's killing their console. So some users only have shutdowns in our game. Some have shutdowns in other games. But
when you mention Call of Duty, these are all games that are multiplayer, right? That's interesting.
Yeah, you've got like Ark Survival Evolved and Call of Duty. Someone said Spider-Man 2 completely kills their PlayStation.
I know that pushes it hard,
Yeah, so, it depends on where the bottleneck is and where the dry spot on the EPU is. So if you happen to have a dry spot somewhere else that's different from another person.
Oh, yeah, because depending on where it
you're going to have different
part
shutdowns.
Of the die that has a CPU, maybe CPU-intensive games, GPU-intensive games.
Yeah, so if your dry spot's at a certain specific part of the EPU, you may shut down a different spot. Like, at least that's a theory. There could be other theories of like, is it the power supply or is it, some other issues? But that's kind of the most common theory. And we're buying people's PlayStations and pulling them apart. And, some members from our community have been drilling holes into their PlayStation, like, the power supply vent to like, is it this? Can I get more airflow? Like, is this going to, kill my console? And these people are pretty desperate, right? But the main concern is for a PC gaming audience, if I just said, hey, pull your PlayStation apart and add more liquid metal, I'm sure everyone in the Moore's Law Dead community could do it.
Yeah, and I believe the PS5 is pretty serviceable in how it's built, too. Compared to some
but
consoles. For
a gamer that's
like,
what is a BIOS, they're done for, right? So it sounds like not a big deal, but for a mass failure to happen where, people know how to put an M.2 in and maybe they know how to, like, clean the fan. But if you're asking them to replace liquid metal, like, what if they get it everywhere off the board and it's conductive? Like, this is not looking good for a problem.
Yeah, and I'm just looking here. It says, and of course, this is the Google AI overview, so I don't know if it's correct. But they say it can cost $250 for a Sony out of warranty repair. It's quite a bit more than I remember for like PS2s. I thought was like $50. PS3 was $150, which wasn't cheap, but $250 is where you're getting to a point where a lot of people don't want to have to spend $250 to get this thing repaired.
It could be the difference between getting a PS5 Pro, right?
Yes.
And PS5 Pros do fail, but we have proof that Sony has at least tried to fix this, but we're not sure the fix is successful. Maybe they made it more rare.
So what did they do? You told me about that too. What is so? What evidence is
image,
there?
But they kind of CNC'd kind of some ridges on the APU in like a pattern. So like on the top of the APU heat spread or whatever, and the kind of the heat sink, they have ridges. So the plan was that it would like the liquid metal would fall into the ridge and not like down to the bottom of the console where it would have problems, right? And so that it would stay there would be the hope. But it looks like it's still kind of failing eventually.
It's funny. I'm also realizing I have a PS5, and the way the area around my TV works, I had it horizontal just because that's how it would fit. And so that would explain why I've never seen this issue, because I'm lucky enough right? To have a setup where that's how it's positioned. Of course, we
And
don't
you
know
also
if this
have to
happens
play
all of them,
demanding
but-
games. And so I've tested with my PS5 dev kits and stuff like that.
Okay.
But all my dev kits are all like barely used. I only turn them on and boot them up for Path of Titans. I haven't been playing Call of Duty for a year. So, I've been using power adapters and measuring how many watts the console's drawing. Like I found out my game draws 233 watts when running on a standard PS5 with a distro.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at other games. When you run the PS4 version of the game, it doesn't crash.
Oh,
right.
That's not a surprise. Yeah.
And I'm just kind of trying to talk to Sony. I'm like, should I add low power mode for these people that their console overheat? Like, what do I do? Right. Like, I've been thinking about, do I lower the frame rate? Because our game's unbound. So you might get 50 FPS, you might get 60 FPS. But if I cap it to like 50, I'm punishing people with good consoles with a lower frame rate, but I'm going to get less shutdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's kind of hard to troubleshoot, and maybe your liquid metal's bad enough where you crash in 15 minutes. So like, what's the point? But maybe just like 5 other games work, but one game pushes it over the edge, and that's what kills it. And so it's very hard to troubleshoot, and there's not a lot of info. So in the PlayStation software, we don't get CPU temp, we don't get GPU temp. We can't really figure out what's going on. And like on a PC, if you're debugging this, you like pull up MSI Afterburner, you'd look at the CPU temp, it'd say this, you'd be like, oh, that's easy, I'll fix that. But there's not really a lot of debugging info, other than like me ripping apart a PlayStation, adding thermocouples all over the motherboard to like figure out what's going on, right? It's hard to debug.
And so I guess what I would say about this one is, like, immediately, if you're listening to this and you think your PlayStation may have this issue, make sure that this is actually happening to you. Like this, it is games that are hard to run, or I should not say hard to run, I should say intensive to run. And it does happen seemingly after a set amount of time, but not always exactly like 15 minutes, for example, but 15 to 30 minutes, and it happens frequently. You probably have this issue, especially if you've been putting your PS5 vertical this whole time. I would then say, honestly, it probably isn't that hard to look up a guide on how to open up your PS5 and just change the thermal paste. And if you're someone who has this issue and you have any degree of opening up laptops even to change the RAM, if you follow a YouTube guide carefully and your thing's out of warranty, I would advise you do this. It's probably not that hard, and that'll be a lot cheaper than sending it in. So I guess that's what I would say short term. Again, if you're someone where it's like 15 to 30 minutes, seems to happen a lot with certain games, and your PS5 has been vertical, you're probably affected by this. Now, moving forward, though, how do you think Sony should handle this?
So this is what I told Sony. Obviously, I'm not going to share anything under NDA or anything like. But what I told Sony was, this is destroying the reputation of my game. Like, I can't have my game known as the PlayStation 5 killer. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's like terrible, right? Because these users are non-technical, they don't know. They just like, oh, I booted up Path of Titans and then did console, right? So they're
more likely to blame a smaller dev than like Call of Duty, right? Because Call of Duty is so big, they're like, certainly Call of Duty couldn't be a killer, but maybe it's Path of Titans.
So what I said to Sony was, what do we do with these consoles, right? Like, there's a PS5 troubleshooting guide, and you go through, and step like 50 is like remove your NVMe drive, and step 49 do a factory reset, and they're like. But when you get to the very bottom question, it asks if Sony games crash or if third-party games crash. And if you say third-party games, they say, hey, contact the developer. Oh. But if you say Sony games crash, they say, send your PS5 in for repair. Right? So there's like a weird double standard going on. But I told them, you better set up a repair program, like, and fix these consoles for free, at least, right? At least the ones that have the liquid metal problem. If it's a dust thing, sure, but there's just too many people with this problem, right? And who knows if once we put this video out and maybe press cover it, how many people out there have this issue and they don't know? Maybe they don't play games for 3 hours at once and they don't get the crash, but it's definitely a high number. Where if you Google PS5 shutdown while playing game, it's a pretty common issue. And from what Tronics Fix has told me, he's had many consoles fail on his side too. He's had a fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like when I think of like what could or should Sony do, it's it's like there's the what should they do morally and what should they do from a business perspective, right? I would say at a minimum, from a business perspective, you don't want controversy and you want loyal fans. So some sort of system actually it sounds like it'd be pretty easy to me, or very doable. I shouldn't say easy, conceivable they could do this, where I bet you could have a way to test if your PS5 is affected. You certainly, they must, and maybe I'm wrong, they must have some way to know the temperature, right?
Well, on my dev side, I can make a test game that just maxes out CPU and GPU usage, and you just see if it shuts off. Right now, some of these consoles,
or if it gets hotter than it should.
Yeah, some of these consoles will get an overheating message. And on a PC, for example, you would throttle, right? But instead of throttling, the PS5 just powers off.
Well, it has a minimum amount it can throttle, right?
Yeah,
because
throttles a little bit, but I'd assume that's just so you don't have a game developer show up and be like, "Why does your game get 5 FPS randomly?" without knowing why it's throttling. But yeah, I would advise them repair program. Like, you've made so much money on the PS5, billions of dollars.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Charging a $30 fee and taking these consoles in is much better than having mass failure problem. And it's not a crazy failure like the Xbox 360, where the underfill was wrong, or like some other issue. But it is enough where in the next couple of years we may see a lot of consoles die, and someone needs to correlate them together and figure out where they're coming from. And is Sony doing anything about this?
I mean, again, I think it'd be a very simple program that you could put on the PlayStation Store. You download it. It runs maybe not the hardest, but they could know on average this this application shouldn't make a standard PS5 any hotter than this. Maybe not even do it until it shuts down. Just like, oh yeah, this is clearly running way hotter than it should. And then you could just have that, assuming you get that gives you a ticket so that you can send it in for a $20 repair instead of a $250 repair, because they know this is a cheap repair. That'd be a very conceivable thing they could do. That would make it so that people could test themselves. Also, this would weed out the issue we had with still have, I suppose, with the RTX 4090 16-pin 12 thing, where everyone thought their 16-pin was melting or breaking because they kept unplugging it and plugging it in over and over every day, causing it to break. You don't want people assuming their PlayStation has this issue when maybe it doesn't. Maybe they put their PlayStation just in a drawer and they don't realize it needs, or they need to remove the dust. But you could have a application that tells them, dust it, make sure it's sitting in an open space, and then step 3, run app. It is running hotter. We now know your PlayStation account is associated with a test that shows it had this issue. Here's a voucher to get it repaired for like $50 or something. Or maybe free, but you have to pay for shipping so that people don't just send them in because it's free to send them in. That's a very easy thing to do. I would think that would be very pro-consumer and probably save the money long-term, depending on how this goes. But
it sounds like Intel could have made a test app that did the same thing for After Lake, huh? But they don't want to know how many consoles are having this problem. They want to wait until everyone's warranty expires, right? Or they don't have to deal with it anymore, right? And I would argue, for example, the players, we bought PlayStations off. So people bought our game for $30, and I sent them, several $100s and said, buy a new PlayStation, send me the old one, I'll pull it apart, I'll figure out what's wrong. And they would say, Matt, I've refused to take your money on moral grounds. No, the company has offered me this. I believe it's Sony's issue. Sony should fix it. I'm going to support your games for life. I'm like, holy shit. Like, if you just treat the customer correct, you have a customer for life, So if Sony handles this issue properly, they'll be seen very well, right?
Well, and let me say this too: the incentives are different than Raptor Lake. With Raptor Lake, Intel wants to make money on the CPU, and then they're done. They're not selling you games to play on your Raptor Lake station. So, from Sony's perspective, if I was in the boardroom, I would say it's actually pro our business to make sure these gamers are always gaming, so they'll buy more games and we make more
microtransactions.
Yeah, and it's like, so if their thing is booting down, they're going to buy less DLC and they're going to buy less games. So we want to make this application to make more money off of them. The more uptime they're spending on the PlayStation Store. So I think there's a good argument from a business perspective for them to do this as well, because I mean, yeah, we'll get to it soon. Like the amount of money they're making off the PS5, there's no need to be stingy here, right? Keep them putting quarters in the machine.
Yeah, just one more thing to add. We had the framework 16 and partially 13 have the same problem.
Oh,
where they had this liquid metal kind of dry spot problem, and they sent out PTM 7950 or whatever it is to all their existing customers and said, "Hey, put this on yourself. This is a fix," kind of thing. So it's not just a PS5 thing. We are seeing kind of other companies at least have issues with liquid metal and it going everywhere. So hopefully they learn from those lessons, but yeah, it's not looking great on my side because I'm predicting they're going to do nothing about it, and I'm going to have to patch my game.
And like add a PS5's damaged mode in the options or something.
Yeah, like Fortnite has a low power mode, and if I add a low power mode, it may conflict with the upcoming low power mode, right, or whatever it is, right? And so that's not going to be good, right?
Yeah, well, and we'll have pictures of this too. I mean, yeah, I have liquid metal issues with framework. It's not liquid metal, but thermal paste issues with a lot of graphics cards now. So it's like, this is a thing that happens. This isn't this is a red ring of death inconceivable thing. It's as usual how you handle an issue that determines if you're pro consumer. All right, well, hopefully they handle it well. And I would say, of course, everybody listening, share this at Sony, spread the word. That is how this issue will get fixed, is if people notice it. This piece of content is brought to you by DoorDash, and that's because even the most dedicated builders need to eat and don't need to be interrupted from what they're doing. Whether that's putting together a new Ultra 7 or 9800 X3D build, or zeroing in the final touches on an overclock of your new 9060 XT, hopefully 16 gigabyte, you don't need to stop. You don't need to stop that overclocking session. You don't need to go, I'll finish my new desktop tomorrow. You can just keep working and have whatever you need delivered, whether that is tacos or coffee or an artisanal meal from a local hip spot. You can find all of that on DoorDash. And actually, you can also use Dash Pass to get $0 delivery fees and lower service fees on eligible orders. That's right, Dash Pass makes it super easy to save on restaurants, grocery stores, and all of your local favorite spots monthly. So, support Moore's Law is Dead and get more from delivery for less with Dash Pass. $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees on eligible Dash Pass orders are at your fingertips here. And better yet, if you sign up for Dash Pass with the coupon below, you will be supporting Moore's Law is Dead, and you can also get your first 30 days of Dash Pass free if you are a new member. Subject to change, terms do apply. But anyways, please do support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out DoorDash and Dash Pass today. All right. So we talked about that. I want to move on to some PlayStation centric questions before we move on to like other gaming hardware things. Crypto AI Tech Bro Scam writes in and says, why did all game devs so far seem to completely ignore the PS5's hardware vision? That is to say, instant loading, quantum leap in CPU performance to improve NPCs, AI, and go down this rabbit hole of ray tracing without much, I guess he's saying without much improvement to AI in games compared to what we saw, frankly, I would say, since PS3. I don't know. What do you think about this? Because I'm sure the instant loading thing is nuanced and like how much they can really do that. I would have to imagine, but I don't know. Like it feels to me like to a degree, say with the Xbox as well, it doesn't feel like these consoles have been maximized in a way we would see like the PS3 or 360 get these late generation games where it's like, whoa, I can't believe this is the same console. And unless you disagree, do you think that the major studios have maximized it? Because I don't know that they have.
Yeah, so I would definitely agree. I remember the PS3 was very well-oiled machine at the end of its life. Like people would be writing code to run on the PPUs and to get the 1% extra performance out. I think the main problem with loading is not reading from the SSD, because that used to be the bottleneck on the hard drives. Was, man, this is so slow. Loading is slow. Usually, it's the CPU time processing the loaded data after you load it, right? So, for example, if you load an asset on Unreal Engine, it may have to construct data based on that loaded asset. It may need to decompress it, it may be using the hardware decompression block. It may not be. Like, it's that kind of load bottleneck that's a problem. And so the problem isn't the SSD anymore, but it's the code that handles the unloading and loading of stuff.
So you think a lot of developers are still not really using the decompression block, maybe on both consoles, the Series X and the PS5, to their maximum ability?
Yeah, so the decompression block usually can only support certain compression methods. So if you're using a different type of custom compression, for example, it may not be using the decompression block as well, right? And sometimes you can have an issue where people are double compressing their assets. So you'll have like your game and it makes a pack file in Unreal that's compressed. And then it goes on the PS5 and the PS5 compresses it again with Kraken compression or whatever they use. And so you have double decompression, which is crazy, right? But you also have the kind of the Unreal code not being as optimized to handle it. It is getting better, but there is still some bottlenecks on the code side. So we're definitely not getting the most out of the PlayStation. In terms of AI, I mean, I don't know if we have a MPU on the PS5. I don't think so, right?
I think he's talking about NPC AI, like how smart enemy players are.
Yeah, so the funny thing about game devs is the thing we optimize for is people think of like AI as like a chess game, of like, oh, the AI is really smart, it's going to win at chess. I look at AI like, can it not get stuck in a tree? Right? Because like this, like you could have a really complicated behavior tree with the smartest AI possible, but if it gets stuck in a tree, it's going to look really dumb. You know what I mean? So a lot of time gets spent for the weird, simple things of like not falling through the map, not getting stuck in a tree. And so the AI might seem trivial, but at least for my game, that's a challenge because the physics engine's kind of optimized to not have all the triangles for collision, for example. So, you know, if you look at games like Cyberpunk, for example, I was playing it on the Switch 2 the other day, and when I looked back in, the AI was just kind of like floating in midair, kind of hovering somewhere. And you think the AI is dumb once you see that. You know what I mean? Once we get past that, then I'm sure we can get focus on the like AI learning from your behavior, for example. Like there's a Unreal Engine plugin where you can do a neural net and kind of train the AI behavior based on that. But we're not really seeing it used, right? Because a lot of people are running into the first gen problems of the AI has a bug or the AI is doing something stupid, like falling through the terrain or something like that. And that's kind of where I see most AI problems at the moment.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of an exact example, but I can think of some AI in games where it actually comes off as incredibly intelligent and challenging, but then like in a Souls-like game, you know, I'll figure out that if I go just right here, it gets stuck on this lamp. And then I can crush this thing like it's nothing.
You have a boss fight and you just stand in this magic spot and nav mesh is not there. So I see the AI as not being just an AI problem. It's a nav mesh problem. It's a terrain problem. It's a game engine problem. It's not necessarily the AI behavior tree smarter, for example.
Aiden writes in and says, "Hi, Tom and Matt. The latest Call of Duty, that is to say Black Ops 7, was announced for PS4 and Xbox One. How long until they finally drop support for these consoles?" And so I actually want to answer this one from my perspective first, because I was listening to Sacred Symbols the other day, and they were covering this corporate PlayStation presentation. And two things stood out to me here from what I heard. Number one, apparently the PS5 has made more profit than all other PlayStations combined already, which is insane. And it makes me go, you know, I'm often critical of basically any company that makes gaming hardware. But I have to unfortunately admit, like I have to admit when Nvidia focuses on AI, you know, they're making all the money, so I can see why they're doing it. And I wish PlayStation was turning out more exclusives every year, but it's not making them less money. So whatever they're doing is working. That's number one. But number two is, unfortunately, they said that they're planning to drive a multi-generational ecosystem into the future. And so to me, that sounds like, much to the chagrin of many game devs I've spoken with recently that were hoping the PS4 would die so that there could be a new base. I don't know. Sounds like PS4 support's going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah, someone with a game on PS4, the thing I'm most concerned about is not the PS4 Pro, but the base PS4. And the way these consoles work with the Xbox One, for example, you've got the Xbox One 2013,
Yeah.
and then you have the Xbox One X. So if there was a way to like drop half of the Xbox One, if we could drop the one from 2013 and just have the Xbox One X carry into the future, like that would be cool. But the way these console policies work is even if you have a title that can't run on the Xbox Series S, you have to have it run anyway, right? With 30% of people still being on PS4, for our game, it's more like 50% or higher. So Sony's numbers vary. But even if the PS4 had 5% of its current base, it will still be millions of consoles, and it still may be worth targeting, right? Like
I think they
the
just said that the
PS4
PS5 is now the more popular gaming console than the PS4. They're now even, finally, this year, 5 years after the PS5 came out.
which is very slow, right? And so you're thinking in a lot of third world countries, for example, and I know places like Brazil, they don't have the money to get a PS5. They're going to keep playing PS4. And are they going to spend their game budget on a new console when they can't afford any games, right? Like for them, upgrading doesn't make any sense. And with it still being x86 architecture, what's the point, right? And I have so many problems on PS4. We have loading problems. We have problems with their download engine for mods. And for example, we have a project where we'd need one developer to spend 6 months writing code just for the PS4, just to fix a terrible loading bug with mods. And you got to think, man, is it worth it? But it really is worth it, And just like the Switch One, I'm worried the Switch One's going to get supported until
You've said
2035. You know what I mean? And it's so slow and so horrible. But it seems like if you want money, we're going to be stuck with this thing. You know what I mean?
I'm curious, though, why would you say that dropping like base Xbox One, base PS4, just to have PS4 Pro and Xbox One X would make a huge difference? Is it the hard drive, enough of it? And I know the PS4 Pro's CPU is like 20-30% faster than the base PS4 CPU. But that's not much. That's 20-30%, not like 10x like the 16 thread Zen 2 and the Series X and the PS5 are. I mean, isn't the GPU really not the issue, which was the biggest difference with the PS4 Pro and the PS4? Isn't it really the hard drive and the CPU at this point?
Yeah, so the issue I had with the PS4 was they have software on top of the hard drive layer that does large writes that are really slow. So like for me, when I benchmark the PS4, I see 1,000 times decrease in performance compared to the Xbox One with the same, 5,000 RPM hard drive or whatever it is, right? Because they have software on top of it that's terrible that we're forced to run through. And it's kind of like the Switch 1 and 2 still using FAT32, is that there's some software on there that is not great. And it's been fixed on PS5. But having to deal with that for the next 10 years sounds terrible to me. But if I were to look at next-gen games, yeah, hard drive's just going to have loading stutter. It's like, we really need to get rid of that. So it really
is the hard drive's the bigger issue than the slow CPU.
Yeah, like the CPU you can kind of work around. I mean, maybe your AI will be limited, or maybe your density count would be limited.
You have to turn down density, and the game's certainly going to run at 30 frames instead of...
If you have a multiplayer game, maybe you're scared about certain bushes not being in certain spots on different consoles. I know we are. Where someone will be on Switch and they'll be like, I can see someone in a bush that's not there because you've culled it out, right? And so I anticipate some devs will keep going on PS5 only, like Rust, for example, just dropped PS4. There's a lot of people upset, a lot of game preservation people very upset that the game you paid for is going to be rendered like not really usable on PS4. But I can see why they would drop it. Like, if you focus on PS5 only and it frees a lot of dev time up, you may get more PS5 sales through that saving of dev time, right? We thought about this with Switch, for example. If we leave Switch behind, because Switch takes 30 days to patch, if we leave Switch behind, we get so much more revenue from updating our game more frequently and having cooler stuff. But Switch has, 150 million plus sales of
I don't know, a lot of people.
So if you're pulling, those numbers on Switch, it's still worth it to go back and spend a couple $100,000 making your game work on that old console. And it's very unfortunate.
What do you think the decision tree is for still supporting like the PS4 and the Xbox One? Is it like the dev goes, can we? And some devs like you, it sounds like can, despite it being hard. But then you'll have devs like Rust, like you brought up, or I have to imagine like if there was a new big multiplayer game, like, I have to imagine Battlefield 6. I don't even remember if 2042 is on PS4. Is it? I don't, probably not. But like, you give too many players on screen. We can't do it. Do you think that's what happens? Like when Call of Duty decides to still support PS4s, they go, look, the fact is the engine will still run. Or do you think they go, well, we have to because it's a very mainstream game and it's going to make us money. And so even if this holds back the PS5 and, maybe an eventual upgrade to PS6 version of the game, we have to keep supporting the PS4. Which one do you think is probably more likely?
Yeah, so a good example is if you're trying to support the Switch 2 right now, it only has so many millions of units sold, right? Like supporting the Switch 2 right now is the most worst thing you could support because compared to something else that maybe has, 150 million sales, right? So they look at the PS4 as the same thing of like, it's not that everyone that owns a PlayStation is going to buy your game. You have to market to those people that are still on that old console, right? But it ends up being millions of dollars, like tens or hundreds of millions of dollars difference, not supporting the PS4, right? So if you look at it like, hey, we're going to port it to PS4, it's going to cost $1 million, but you're going to make 100 back, you're really stupid not supporting the PS4 still, right? And I
Unless
think that's
you
how
absolutely have to, or do you think Rust just is an outlier where their game just wasn't played on PS4 that much anymore? Do you think that's...
Yeah, they might have the case where so much dev time was spent on PS4 that was... it's an opportunity cost, right? So our game runs on PS4 without us doing a lot of upkeep. But if you're trying to expand your game and add new features, like we added a new range system to our game and it destroyed the frame rate just on PS4, right?
Yeah, I believe it.
And I have artists that come to me on my team like, Matt, people are saying the game could look a lot better. I've added this new rain weather system where all the trees move and the PS4 is now below 30 FPS, it's now 26 FPS. And I have to go back to the artist and say, hey, look, go remove this rain feature. We need to change it or refactor it. And so much time is spent fixing that it becomes not worth it at some point. So it's really a choice of money versus time versus the goals for your game. And everyone kind of makes a different decision.
Techno writes in and says, Matt, if you could give PlayStation one piece of advice for their handheld, especially with the lessons learned maybe from what you've seen from the Switch and now Switch 2, what would they be?
The biggest thing I would do, I guess there's a lot of stuff to learn about Switch, but there's also a lot of stuff to learn that Switch is doing wrong right now too, right? So if you want to do better than Switch, you really need to look at what is Switch is doing great and what you could do better. The things that come to mind are the price, obviously, is a huge one. Of like, the Switch is not selling for $1,000 handheld with 24 gigs of RAM, right? So that needs to be a factor, but also people need to buy this thing en masse to actually get a lot of support. We all remember the Vita. We all remember how the Vita went.
Mm-hmm.
It had memory card problems. The big thing is about compatibility, right? And I think if they can leverage their existing title base of PS4, PS5 games, or even, for example, PS1 to PS5 games, I think that's going to be a huge win. Like, Switch is still selling GameCube games to people in a subscription, right? So they're utilizing their existing game library and history. And I think PlayStation needs to do that as well. Like, can we have PS3 games run on the handheld and PS4 games, right? Like, utilizing that is going to make people want to buy this thing, right?
From what insiders tell me, the answer to that is yes, and Sony just hasn't allowed you to do that yet.
Right? Like, if you think about, like, and this, I guess this can translate into, we'll talk about Xbox soon, but the existing library is like a huge form of locking. If you already own 1,000 Xbox games and you're buying the new Xbox handheld and it can't run all the games you own, you're going to feel terrible, right? So with the Switch 2, even though they only have Mario and Cyberpunk and barely any new games for the Switch 2, they have the back catalog and the library and the account services and all these integrations that make it a choice to buy it, right? And the problem with the handheld space is Sony going to make this handheld only do PS handheld games and everyone's going to have to port it from scratch.
No.
I think it'd be dead.
I'm
Right?
100% sure it will run at least PS5
So if
games.
they can get the existing library running, PS1 games, PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5, or whatever, some PS5 low power mode, I think they're set. So I think they're set up for success. The problem does become, I know they have, like, for example, the PlayStation Portal, right? Which is like, I feel like they got the ergonomics of this thing almost perfect. We really just need one of these with a really good processor and GPU, right? I think they could pull it off, and I think the Portal handheld is like a trial run of what this thing could be and what it could be like.
Mm-hmm.
But the only concern is if it's too late. I have like 10 handhelds with me, right? I even have the MSI Claw, right? And there's a new Xbox One coming out too. But is it going to be handheld fatigue where everyone already has a Switch and PlayStation Portal? And they're like, why am I going to buy this thing? Right? It's like, that's going to be a hard problem to find.
Well, that's why I've long thought that the best strategy for Sony is to not rush out a PS5 handheld, but instead to have a PS6 handheld that uses a 36 compute unit, but kind of like Series S, updated to all the new PS6 features, SoC, that you can use for two purposes. One is the handheld. The other one is when you launch PS6, which we all know now because the PS5 Pro sold well, it's not going to be cheap. If the PS6 is, and I'm not saying it will be, but let's say the PS6 is, $700 or something. You could go, well, yes, the PS6 is $700, but now we have the PS6S, which is, $400, and we're just discontinuing the PS5. If you want a PS5 level of performance, it's called a PS6S. But also we can use that SoC for a handheld. If the handheld doesn't sell well, whatever, we're still using it for these other products, so that there's some sort of an insurance policy. That's at least what I think they should do, so that, because, speaking of being late to the party, I have a real concern, although if they're going to support the PS4 for the next 10 years, I don't know if it actually matters, that if they launch a PS5 handheld, let's say next year or something, like a year before the PS6 comes out, doesn't that feel weird? Like, shouldn't they have just waited a year, even if it costs more, to make it a PS6 handheld? I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree with waiting and doing it correct. Like, they either needed to launch before the Switch 2 was launching and before all these Xbox handhelds were launching, or you got to launch late. You got to be like first, or you got to be like late and correct, right? And so I think now the best strategy might be waiting, but I could see an argument for not waiting, where if Switch 2 gets too many unit sales, you may have a hard time converting people, right? My suggestion would be for PlayStation, anybody that's bought a PS5, get a discount code for $100 on the new PlayStation handheld and go convert your existing customers. Like, you have so many people that already use PS5. You just need to convert them to gaming on the go customer, right? So if you can convert them, that would be the biggest win, right?
Or I guess, maybe it could still be PS5. I mean, what I've leaked in a recent live stream about the low energy mode, to me, suggests something that in reality will only perform 20% worse probably, or something, than existing PS5 games. But if it's a handheld that has a 1080p screen, it probably doesn't matter. I'll probably run at the same frame rate or more. You could take a cheaper version of this SoC and maybe make a PS5S as well that you sell for $299, and this could be the way to get people off PS4, is late in the gen, the budget PS5 that runs barely worse but costs half as much. I guess that's an option they could do, and the argument might be, let's do this sooner rather than later to get people the hell off the PS4. I guess maybe that could be what they're doing as well. I don't know.
I guess there is also the concern about, can this handheld be docked like the Switch? Is this going to fight existing PS5 sales, right? Like, there's all these weird questions of, like, is this going to be like a PS5 Lite or PS6 Lite that you can dock and play on your TV? Because a lot of, like, the Asus ROG Li and...
I would guess no, especially when we look at the efficiency mode that seems all about just saving energy. But I would say it would be insane if it didn't have an HDMI port attached to it, because I'll be honest, that is appealing to me. Like, I have some games on PlayStation instead of PC. I would love a PlayStation handheld where when I go home to Minnesota for Christmas, I can bring the handheld, plug it into a TV, and, oh no, it's 1440p instead of 4K. But, like, oh, my library's there. I think that would be appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, if it doesn't have a HDMI port or a dock, You're fighting against the ROG Ally that has one. You're fighting against the Switch 2 that has one. You're probably shooting yourself in the foot.
I mean, frankly, it's insane the Vita didn't. I don't understand.
Yeah, the Vita dev kit does, but
No.
the actual, and they had the PlayStation TV, right, where it was like a Vita, but it was cannibalized to just have the motherboard and in a dock format.
Yeah, so that's what I would see the PlayStation handheld argument being, is like they have some S version of the PS5 or a 6, so that it's like a consolation prize when they, in my opinion, undoubtedly announced the PS6 is $600-$800. They're like, yeah, but this is the $400 model. It's actually cheaper than the PS5, and it's just smaller and about PS5 performance. So get off the PS4, people. If you've been waiting, stop waiting, you know.
Yeah, and it seems like their PS5 they're going to sell without a disk drive, kind of by default, right? And so the lower end price point is going to be the handheld if they have it, right?
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. It certainly should be, but again, we'll get to the price of handheld soon. Let's see. So let's touch on this. I mentioned the Switch 2. You did want to speak about this, and we'll get to the Xbox handheld, but we have to talk about. You say there's some software concerns with the Switch 2 about it that you think could hold back its performance long term, much more than the hardware.
Yeah. So my concern is our game's very moddable. So people adding dragons, people adding all sorts of mods to our game was great, right? But we spend 90% of our time on the Switch 1 finding mods for the right limitations. Like, for example, the Switch 1 and 2 still use FAT32 and exFAT, which is a really old file system. And FAT32, for example, you can't have a file more than 4 gig, right?
And so I'm right. You're saying on Switch 2, you can't have a texture that's bigger than 4 gigabytes.
Yeah. Now, they'll do this thing where they'll break up the files, right? So they'll have in 4 gig chunks, right? But you can't have a file that is 30 gigabytes, for example, or 5 gigabytes. And so the problem with the Switch 2 is I need to load files in chunks, right? And so the Switch 2 will have limitations like you can only load 10 chunks of 4 gigabytes. And if you load 11, you need to unload one, right? And it's just kind of a mess. I have this on Switch 1. And so we're seeing that Switch 2 still uses FAT32 and exFAT. It doesn't inspire me that we're going to have free restrictions from making good games, right? Like my biggest concern is that I'm going to be dealing with the same awful Nintendo approval process from the Switch 1, copied and pasted to the Switch 2. Maybe they change numbers. Like maybe they say you can only write so many megabytes per second or something like that. But I'm not looking forward to that kind of restriction. And I don't know why they're still using it. They have to pay a licensing fee for using exFAT. So you'll notice that when you update a Switch and you put an SD card, it needs to update. And it's because it's telling a server to pay a licensing fee to Microsoft for using their really old file system.
Wait, really?
This is a real thing. Yeah,
that's
right?
incredible.
So they could have used like all of the Linux file systems available and all the free.
Like what does the PlayStation use?
They just have their own, version of the Linux file, FreeBSD file system or whatever, right? And it's crazy that the Switch, even though they made their own operating system, needs crazy requirements. Like the Switch 2, for example, needs a lot of RAM and a core, multiple cores to run the Nintendo Discord, I call it, Game Chat, right? And we can't even use the full power of the Switch 2. So that's one thing. But also, we're still on a file system that's like, God knows how old it is now, right? With 4 gig limitations on files. That's crazy, right? Like, there must have been some restriction on we want people to be able to put this into their PC and load it. But it doesn't make any sense to me, these restrictions. It make no sense.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, none of these are really like deal breakers, though, like 3 gigabytes of RAM on the Switch 2. I mean, the Switch 1 originally was, which just some games can't run on it because of that. Like, these are all things all devs can work around fundamentally, but they are annoying.
Yeah, so there's a FAT32 4 gig limit, but Nintendo puts their own limits on top of that. That's like, you can only load 10 of these at a time or something like that, right? And so when I do mods, for example, someone might download 100 gigs of mods. And the Switch 1, for example, we have to rearrange things in this 4 gigabyte chunk. So if you download a 10 meg skin mod, we'll put that in. But if you download 3 other gigs, we have to like defrag it, right? Like we have to move files around to defrag these 4 GB buckets, right? And the reason why it's so bad is the Switch uses a lot of encryption and DRM. So it's not just it's a 4 gig empty bucket, it's a 4 gig pre-filled bucket that's encrypted, right? And so all the file systems have this. For example, Xbox has this and PlayStation. Is the focus is on DRM over performance, right? Like if they wanted to squeeze every bit out of the hardware, they'd be like, hey, file system encryption. Who cares about that? Like you're going to get a copy of a game on Xbox that, you know, someone can get off a disk somewhere. What's the point, right? But it's all encrypted and all in these pre-written partitions. And it's really bad, right?
Well, Nintendo's very, very scared of people cracking their systems.
Well, they were scared about a game writing too much and killing your Switch, right? So are they really going to let us use all of the Switch I/O? Or are they going to be scared that, because they have this with the NAND where they use a really cheap NAND chip that dies in record numbers of writes. So they're concerned about games writing too much and the NAND dying because it's really cheap NAND.
And it just makes you wonder, right? The amount of money they spend into programming limits on writing. How much more, like 10 cents a console to give it a NAND chip that, like, I've never had a USB drive and I've run operating systems off of them die. Like, I recently had a PC repaired, and someone, it was at Silver Knight PCs. I'll give them a shout out. And they like analyzed a 1 terabyte drive that was like finally breaking from like 2019. And I don't remember what he said. I think he said he wrote like 100 terabytes to it or something before it started showing. And it really like any issues whatsoever. And I don't even think it was from writing. I think there was an issue with like a liquid cooler dripping on it for like a year. I guess I never saw it drip, but I guess that might have happened. And that's why it broke. And when I think of hundreds of terabytes being written to something and it not breaking from that, like that wasn't the most expensive drive I got. Like, what are they really saving?
It reminds me of the Xbox 360 where, and I think the Xbox One had this, where they saved 30 cents a console by not having these rubber grommets on the DVD drive. And so the DVD drive would just scratch discs like crazy, right?
Yeah,
compared to a PC DVD drive. And you got to wonder, like, for a 256 gig NAND chip, is it really worth getting the cheapest one that dies really quickly and spending, like, you know, I have to send Nintendo like so much data on how much writes my game's doing, and
someone has to review that.
Some poor person at Nintendo, like every time I patch the game, has to go through hours of video of my game writing stuff to their NAND chip that's going to die. And you got to think, this is such a waste of time. Like I spoke to the guy, I'm like, hey, this is a waste of time. And I feel bad for him because he has to go through all this stuff over a 30-cent NAND chip that could have been better. You got to wonder if, like on PlayStation 5, there's no I/O limit of like, you can only write this much. You know what I mean? Just use as much as you can. It'll be fine. But the Switch 2, we have these limits. And a good example of a limit I ran into on the Switch 2 was I was playing Cyberpunk in docked mode. And I'll notice it was only getting 30 FPS, like really terrible, kind of unplayable kind of frame rate. So I go to turn on the performance mode to get like 40 hertz. And I can't turn it on because I don't have a 120 hertz TV, right? Like because my TV is 60 hertz, I can't turn on performance mode to get 40 FPS on a 60 FPS TV. Like this is crazy. Like why would it be locked behind 120 hertz mode if the game doesn't even get 120 hertz?
Mm-hmm.
That's like the weirdest, dumbest thing I've ever seen as a restriction.
Well, so far the Switch 2 is selling very well, but that's the type of stuff that makes me concerned if the sales ever slow down. Like its momentum is what makes Nintendo do well when they do well from a developer perspective, I think, because they don't go out of their way like Microsoft might or sometimes Sony might to try to court devs. They just assume you'll have to support them. And you do. You do have to support them because of how successful it is. But were that to ever slow down, then you look at the Wii U, boom, no support whatsoever because it isn't as easy to program for.
Well, just to add one more thing, there's also the dev kit situation where almost no developers have dev kits for this thing. And you got to wonder, they've made millions of consoles. Couldn't they make 15,000 dev kits and just send them to everybody? There isn't a lot of developers to send them to, right? So I do wonder with the lack of new games and updated games, I'm stuck supporting my game on Switch 2 without a dev kit. And I've got to guess, well, send this build in, hope it runs on Switch 2. Nintendo can check it, and it's not a good feeling. I tell you that one.
Are you too depressed to go outside because of how expensive Microsoft software is? Well, there's absolutely no need for that. Just go to CDkeyoffer.com. That's right, this piece of content is once again sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com. And I say once again because they've been a fantastic sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and its community for many years. And that's because they always deliver the best pricing reliably for Microsoft products like Windows operating systems, Office software, and they also sell games and other things as well. So make sure you check them out, especially during their Easter sale going on right now. And if you do, use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software, and then Die Shrink to save 3% off on everything else on the website. The community uses them. I use them for my new Zen 4 X3D desktop. And Jesse here needs to stop moping around, and I think use them as well. So that's once again, support Moore's Law is Dead by going to cdkeyoffer.com through the links below today. It's okay, Jesse. It's okay. All right. Let us now transition to Xbox. Before we get into like the Zen and Nova Lake stuff, I actually got a voicemail question here. So let me play this right now from Fred Borger.
I've heard that Xbox was like an initiative to help solidify Windows as the de facto gaming platform by consolidating like the disparate graphics APIs of the 90s, like Glide and Voodoo or whatever. If that's true, do you think Xbox was successful in its mission and may no longer be seen as necessary by the higher ups at Microsoft?
So what do you think about that question?
Yeah, so just to go over why Xbox exists. At least the Xbox One, the original one, right?
Not the Xbox One, the original Xbox.
The people call it the Xbox VCR, because it's so old or whatever. The reason it exists is because Microsoft was worried that Sony would take over the living room, right? That Sony would have a PC in every living room and it wouldn't be running Windows, right? So there was a fear. And originally the Xbox was going to run Windows, right? So you better run Office on your Xbox, right? And so there was a lot of kind of controversy. There's a famous event called the Valentine's Day Massacre, where Bill Gates almost killed the Xbox because it wasn't running the real version of Windows. So part of the effort was, we need to have a PC in every living room because that's going to be the future. So I guess there is a bit of a reliance on DirectX and trying to make DirectX gaming focused. So I guess that could be seen as successful. But we also have Vulkan now, right? And we also have other technologies. But I don't know if the point of Xbox was purely just to make graphics APIs. With like SteamOS and all these other options available now, you got to wonder, is that looking really worth it? Right?
Yeah, I think you could say they suffered from mission creep, is like a military term of like, well, we're going to do a surgical strike here. And then it turns into, well, we could also maybe do this. And before you know it, you're in some long quagmire of a war that was supposed to be one missile strike or something. You could say that there was supposed to be the surgical strike by Xbox to try to like have a Trojan horse in the living room with Windows and to make sure like DirectX succeeds. And then the gamer-centric people in charge of Xbox said it has to do this to succeed in the first place, so we don't want to do any of that. And over time, it almost turned into, well, Xbox needs to become the Netflix of gaming somehow. And I'm not sure really what the goal was at a certain point,
It's changed to like be a TV, like the Xbox TV moment where they try to change it into a media center for some reason. And now it's turning into a PC or whatever, or just nothing, right? A sticker you put on stuff. And yeah, it just seems like they've changed leadership a lot of times. And the real like Sony has a very strong definition on what is a console and how's it going to work and what's going to run and exclusives. And Microsoft seems to be kind of regretting the Activision Blizzard purchase and trying to pay for it and freaking out and trying to change strategies in hopes of paying back the debt they have from that purchase, which is not looking great right now.
Yeah, that's just so weird about the Activision purchase as well, as it's like I remember when that happened, and you know, you've seen it to a lesser degree from the PlayStation side where they're like, oh, they bought a studio, haha, screw you, Xbox gamers, and then when Xbox or Microsoft bought Activision, they're like, haha, now Call of Duty won't come to PlayStation. I just remember hearing and really just thinking about like, well, that's not true. You don't buy Activision to make less money. They have to keep putting Call of Duty on PlayStation. And it's almost like they didn't get that, and then they bought it, and they're like, well, we're going to keep. So how is this actually helping us do anything? We're already making money on every Call of Duty sold on an Xbox. Like, what is this even doing for us?
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to become a game publisher, right? And like this hardware thing, they don't really. With the Lost Broken Silicon episode, you talked about kind of Xbox not really caring about their customers and releasing this handheld that didn't run any Xbox games. I gotta feel the same way, right? I'm just concerned that they don't really know what they're doing. They seem panicked and confused, right? We have the MetaQuest thing coming out with Xbox branding that got
Yeah,
leaked.
I saw that rumor this weekend, or not really a rumor. There's a picture of it. Yeah, I said that actually. I was hiking with a couple of friends, and it popped up on my phone, and I was like, "There's a Meta Quest 3S or whatever it is, Xbox." And one of them, she goes, "What does that mean?" And I said, "I don't know what that even means to have an Xbox VR device." Because at first I thought it meant, I mean, it seems too late to do this because the VR craze has kind of died down, but maybe they're going to patch the Xbox to be able to use a Quest. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. There's always rumors they might do that. And then I looked and it's like, no, they're branding a Quest as an Xbox, and I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so the concern I have is they're diluting the brand. So back in the Xbox 360 days, the brand meant everything. Like when that Red Ring of Death thing happened, they replaced all these consoles for free to protect the brand.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like they're diluting the brand to not mean anything.
And at rapid pace. Like I've never seen more dilution in
like the Xbox is a Samsung refrigerator with Android on it. The Xbox is like a PC. The Xbox is like this console. Like the Xbox is an ROG Ally, and you got to wonder. And they're also trying to do this multi-store strategy where they want to add Steam on the Xbox and Epic Game Store. You got to wonder where their revenue is going to go. For example, I'm not going to put my game on the Xbox store if people can just download the game directly from me and I don't have to pay Microsoft 30% of the game sale. And you have to wonder what happens to Xbox Live subscriptions where consoles have this paywall to play online that Steam doesn't even have. And what's going to happen to their paywall when the Xbox is a PC now? And are they going to lose Game Pass subscribers and Xbox Live subscribers? Because, you know, if the ROG Xbox Handheld comes out, you're not going to be buying Xbox Live for it, for a paywall.
A lot of people won't. Yeah.
They're going to lose a huge chunk of revenue from that. So they're killing their own revenue stream and their console and their brand in the hopes that they could diversify and be everywhere, which could work, but they don't seem to be pulling it off very well, right? And so I'm worried that PlayStation's going to have the strongest brand of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have this most diluted brand where people don't know what an Xbox is anymore. And they're going to have a hard time selling their console. And I'm worried it's a very dangerous trend that they're going towards.
Yeah, where PlayStation just has free reign, you know, of AAA console gaming. Let me see. Let me actually just go to this question right away. Intel Fanboy and Wire Rope, I combined them. They both write in, and they say, are you expecting Microsoft to have one more Xbox console build and then probably transition over to letting the customer just game on a PC or any other device they want? Furthermore, with Microsoft having Asus make their gaming handheld and Meta make their VR headset, is future Xbox hardware manufacturing just always going to be third party? Like their software? Realistically, hardware is very expensive, and especially when you're not able to sell it in any high numbers. Yeah, I mean, I heard from someone who worked at AMD, now this might have been 2 or 3 years ago, that, you know, Xbox is working on a new console, and then I had a leak at some point where I said, by the way, they are making a next-gen Xbox, and I wasn't told the specs, but the person at AMD said it looks like what you might expect. It's an x86 APU basically. That it's we're not going to tell you how strong it is, but I can tell you it's not like there's some huge surprise here. And So I've just logged that away as, I don't know what they're going to do with Xbox on PC or the Steam Deck and blah, blah, blah. But I assume they'll have at least one more traditional Xbox home console. After seeing the announcement of the Xbox, the Asus Xbox ROG X Ally X handheld, I don't think it will be traditional. I think it's going to be a $1,000 PC. Like, is where I'm sitting. I'd be surprised if it was an only Xbox runs Xbox games console next gen, and it wasn't literally running Windows 11 or 12 or something.
Yeah, if they made an Xbox emulator that could run all of the Xbox games, this might be a very different discussion.
Sure.
Right? But it seems like that's not going to really be pulled off in a great number. They're kind of pushing Xbox Play Everywhere, which is hoping that developers port their game to the Windows Store kind of thing. I guess the Xbox branded version of it. So yeah, my concern is just the headset. Like I said, they said the headset, the manufacturing. I don't see this making them more successful. I really see them diluting their brand, diluting their customer base, not really supporting Xbox games. And the Xbox developers will say, I'm going to put my game on Steam instead, and it'll run on the Xbox PC anyway. What's the point? Right?
Right. If you can play it on your Xbox just by downloading Steam.
Right. And Steam may be more favorable to be on, and there's less platforms to maintain and less platform support to. And Steam doesn't require subscription to play online. That's concerning. Like, they're really going to kill their business over this one. Like, they're hoping that there's going to be an Xbox Game Pass on the PlayStation Store, and that's how they'll get their money, right? But I don't know if it's going to work like that. I don't know if Sony's going to say, yes, put Xbox Game Pass on PlayStation and just let it run, right?
Yeah, my gut reaction would be, if you would have asked me a few years ago, I'd say eventually Sony probably will. But at this point, I don't know. I could be wrong, everybody. Maybe everyone's going to throw it in my face in the comments in a year or two. My gut is that Sony will not allow Game Pass, actually, because not because of like letting Microsoft make money or whatever. It actually has to do with Microsoft has clearly trained their fans to not buy games. And if I'm Sony, I'm going, we don't want to do that. Like, I know they have their own version of Game Pass, but it really seems to be more focused on retro gaming and a large catalog of like classics, and less focused on boatloads of new games that you get for free instead of buying them a la carte. And I think if you're Sony, you're like, we've made more money on the PS5 already than we did on all previous PlayStations combined. Why would we rock the boat and risk letting some Game Pass thing come on our console that might train our fans to not buy our games anymore when we're just doing so well without that?
Yeah, I could agree with the not buying games thing. I had players that show up sometimes and they're like, oh, I thought I could get this game for free on Game Pass. Like, why isn't it on there? Right. And with developers going to more expensive games, like, $80, $90 games, is the Game Pass really going to pay back that $90 of buying the games traditionally? Probably not. So they're hoping that there's a lot of subscribers that forget that they're still paying for it and kind of get that subscription going. And yeah, it just seems bad for the platform. And I guess we'll give it a bit to see if it comes out. I think the next Xbox could be a PC, but that's that'll be the death of Xbox for me, because I won't be porting my game. I'll just be telling people to download Steam or download our launcher and not give Xbox money.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. And I've seen rumors come out that they may be working on an Xbox backwards compatibility emulator for PC. And if that happens, well, good. And it better happen by the time the handheld comes out, though, because you only get to do this correctly once, where you're like, everyone should buy our new handheld. And at launch, it has this emulator that plays your huge catalog of Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and so on and so forth games. If you say, oh, eventually we're going to have that, I don't think anyone buys the handheld at launch, right? And so if this is what their plan is too, like to move to PC, then they have to have that emulator thing working that's integrated with some Xbox game store on PC. As soon as possible, to not make this a big gut punch to their fans as well, because even if they want to get out of the console business, you can't end Xbox's traditional console life by screwing over everyone that bought 20 years of games, because then those people will see an Xbox sticker on their new Samsung fridge or whatever the heck they're going to put this on, and they'll go, oh yeah, that brand screwed me over. You got to have this fixed when you transition to the new era, so that they go, don't worry, all my games are still carrying over, we're good to go. And by the way, I will say this is coming to mind. I had Age of Empires 3 on the Games for Windows Live store, and then I had to buy it again on Steam because I couldn't freaking get it after they killed the Xbox, the Games for Windows Live store, even though their new store was the same store. So they've screwed me over before too.
Yeah, I gotta agree. The thing that concerns me at the handheld is like, why release it when you haven't got this game layout to do it, right?
And maybe they will. There's rumors, but if they don't.
Yeah, and it also concerns me from a dev standpoint about anti-cheat. The reason we like Xbox being a closed platform is it's secure, it has anti-cheat, it has console bans if people pirate your game. Am I going to have to pay for Battle Life for Xbox now because it's just a PC? Like, there's a reason why, like, PC has serious cheating problems and serious problems with gaming. And we're going to bring all that over to their console now? Like, just doesn't make any sense, right? For me, it just seems very weird.
Well, so you touched on this. I want to jump to this subject now then. 40,000 40K Emperor demands you join Patreon, writes in and says, be honest, as a developer, are you happy the price of games seems to be going up soon? We listen and we don't judge here at Moore's Law is Dead. Or as a gamer, are you conflicted by this? The way the industry is going, there's going to be a lot of studios blindsided by FAFO if they fear of, what is it, effing up? Missing out? I don't know what he meant to say there. If they are all think they can raise their prices.
Yeah, so as a developer, it's kind of I get a multi-part view. So part of me is happy that games is going up.
Oh, he meant F around and find out. I got to say that so there's not a million comments saying
yeah. Part of me is happy that game prices are going up. My game's only $30. So like if everyone goes to like $90, maybe I'll go to 40, like who knows, right? But the problem I have is the game industry may crash, right? We're seeing mass layoffs of game developers and markets. And if games are so expensive that people would rather pirate or not buy them, it's not looking good for the industry, right? Switch, the new Mario Kart World game, for example, in Canada is like $120, right? And you're just thinking, man, how many normal games could I get for that price? So as a player, I'm happy with this, especially if they're adding microtransactions. Like, let's face it, it's not $80. It's $80 for the standard version, plus there's microtransactions, plus there's a season pass, plus a battle pass, plus DLC, and like it keeps going, right? And so that's kind of my concern, especially with games like GTA, for example.
What do you think GTA 6 is going to cost? Someone asked that question too.
Yeah, I think the same person asked, right? And so, yeah, I could believe it could go for, $90 or more, or, someone suggested 120, that'd still be willing to buy it. But also Rockstar wants you to get in at a lower price for microtransactions.
What I was going to say, like, I could see the argument that GTA could cost $100 because I would certainly buy it for $100. But they're this weird success story where not only are they a successful single player game everyone bought, but also they know they'll make all this money on the other end with GTA Online. So if they are, and you're Rockstar, you're like, let's just make it $70 because who cares? We're going to make more money if we get more copies out there anyways.
Yeah, it reminds me of Fallout 76 when it launched, and it was a huge disaster. They were kind of duct taping it to PlayStations and accessories and hoping people would buy it. And the funny thing is that the price is worth selling at $0 because there's a microtransaction, right? But it does wonder if they go for a higher price. They could probably get away with it, honestly. But is another game dev going to try the same thing and they're not GTA and completely?
Well, Borderlands 4 said they were going to make it $80, and then they had to backtrack after backlash. And so that's where I'm like, I get your worry about a gaming crash actually as well. I think there's a chance we could run into one of those in the next 5 years. But at the same time, I think a lot of these games clearly cost a ton of money to make. It's fine if they charge more. It's just not every game. Like if Fallout 5 wants to be $80 and GTA 6 wants to be $120, I wouldn't argue with those two things, as long as Mario Kart's frankly $50, because I don't think that's an $80 game at all, in my opinion. And so I just think there needs to be this world where there's like 40, 60, 80, 100, and it makes sense which one tries to charge what. But that doesn't seem to be what these studios want to do. They're all chomping on the bit, I'm sure, right now to get to $80 after seeing Mario Kart World. Unless they maybe see it flop, then maybe they won't.
Yeah, and as an indie dev, I'm still selling my game for $30. And it's very profitable. It's like working, right? Now, if we spent $400 million on that game, like maybe Concord, we would be done for, right? Like it'd be crazy, right? So it really depends on how much money invested in the game at the beginning, how much you're trying to get back. For these third world countries, for example, people in Brazil are not going to buy GTA 6 for $120, right? They're going to get some discounted version. And so you find out that the way regional pricing on Steam works is the US players are subsidizing the other countries, right? And how expensive does it get before you change your Steam region, pretend to be from a third world country to try to get it on discount, right? Which happens a lot for people.
Yeah, as long as people like have the money in the United States, as long as it doesn't cost that much more, then you'll just go along. But the second you start trying to charge $90 in the US and like $40 in another country, instantly that is when you're going to see this thing happen where, like you said, pirating would go up and looking for more loopholes will happen.
Yep.
XZ writes in and says, a couple months ago, Tom asked a developer, Brian Heemskirk, on Broken Silicon 297, that if he had a budget for over $150 million to make a AAA game, what engine, graphical features, etc., would he plan for this hypothetical AAA game if it was going to come out in, 4 years or something? Brian's answer was rather conservative, stating that due to the stagnation in GPU advancements, he wasn't actually that confident that he should plan to have mandatory ray tracing hardware or similar next-gen extensive features. But if I asked you this question, Matt, you hypothetically, you get a $150 million budget and a team to work on a AAA game that comes out in 3 to 5 years, what would you do? What hardware would you not support? What graphical level would you target? What platforms would you target?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So like 150 million is a lot of money. I could probably make 150 versions of my game for that budget, right? And so you got to think about how to sell the most units to get that money back, right? And so my ideal goal would be, PS5 and quote unquote next gen only and RT only, and using Unreal Engine 5.6 with all the new features like Lumen and Nano and stuff like that. But if you're trying to make back $150 million or more, and this is assuming like, is this a marketing budget? Because the marketing budget's double the game budget.
I assume this isn't. This doesn't include marketing. This is just
so like technical. If you're doing marketing, you might spend double 150 million on marketing, and you may be closer to, several hundred million instead, right? And so you're looking at like Concord was what 400 million.
Yeah, well, that's an exception.
And it flopped, right?
A worst case, yeah.
And so you got to think if you need that many sales back, you're probably going to still be wanting to be on PS4 to earn back that many millions of dollars. And that's like the unfortunate answer. Maybe if you're GTA 6, you could get away with just being on the next gen just because you're doing $120 and you're doing...
Well, and they're going to sell this for 15 years probably before the next one comes out. So whatever, people will get to a PS5 eventually.
It reminds me of Assassin's Creed Shadows, where they still haven't broken even on their development costs of the game. And they were hoping that over the next 10 years, enough people buy their game to make even. So these are the questions you're going to ask for, is if you're going to struggle to get those, several $100 million back, you probably want to be on PS4, unfortunately.
Well, it almost sounds like, am I wrong? Like one answer you might have is you'd rather you take this to make 10 games over the next 20 years.
That would be of less risk. Like I could make 150 games. Like the way it bets is Microsoft will spend hundreds of millions of dollars making a game. And then an indie dev called Pal World makes their game and completely destroys every game they've ever made before, right? And you're going to wonder, is it good to make
Hmm.
20 games, 30 games, 50 games?
Like if it's
And
The
see
Last
what
of Us
one
Part
works out.
3, we know The Last of Us Part 3 will make money. But unless it's that or GTA, maybe it should be quantity, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
And there was this slide from the PlayStation 5 investor presentation where they said that half of their revenue was made up with third-party live service games. And so this is why, I guess Tom can include in the edit, but this is why Sony wants to do a live service game, is because it's making more than all their game store sales and PlayStation Plus kind of combined, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why all these games are all live service Battle Pass games, because you can't pirate a live service game, and you need to make all that recurring money to get all your investment back, right? So like this new RT game, it almost matters more if it's a live service rather than having RT, right? And how many consoles you support.
Yeah. Again, I think I've said this on other episodes as well. Like, I don't think it's smart for Sony or any publisher, really, to say, because this almost happened with the people that made Returnal. They were trying to make some battle royale, decided halfway through development, this will fail. We're just going to be one of a dozen, and it's unlikely to make the money back. Turned it into a successful single player game, and that's fine. And then Helldivers 2, I don't think Sony expected to be as successful as it was, but it was. So what you want to do is just get more studios and let them experiment, and one of them will probably make a good live service game, not try to force all of your AAA devs to make a live service game that fails, and then you lost. Well, then you waste up $400 million on Concord,
There's also something about making a game you want to make rather than making what's popular. So I look at games like Marathon, and I see that it's an extraction shooter, and I think, are they making an extraction shooter because they want to make that game? Or is that just popular right now and they're just going after that market?
Yeah.
If you're making a battle royale game, good luck getting your 150 million back, right? Like, Fortnite's got Spider-Man. What do you have for your game, right?
Yeah.
You're done for.
Yeah, and probably John Wick and Kratos and Master Chief as well. This piece of content is brought to you by the fans that support the independent journalism of Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. And it does need supporting, from personal attacks from tech elites that get mad when we tell you that they are lying to gamers and their own shareholders, to legal attacks from mega corporations that cost the team time and money. This is expensive and often very stressful work. And it's work that doesn't depend on access journalism, nor depend on NDAs or agreements that would sanitize our opinions and hold us back. No, nothing holds us back, and we are independently funded, and we use said funding to do things like pay professional renderers to show you products before they come out, so that the sources that provided us the original pictures don't get in trouble. Or we also create bonus content like Die Shrinks, where you have videos and interviews coming out multiple times a month exclusively to reward our patrons with the extra content that we know they would like to see, whether it's inside scoops or more in-depth conversation and stuff that we just know wouldn't profit if we put it out publicly, but it doesn't need to profit for our fans on Patreon because it is self-funded. And so if you want any of that bonus content, or you want to support the independent journalism of Moore's Law is Dead, or honestly, if you just want to support me, Dan, Gerard, Carbon Cry, or Jesse and Maurice so that we have food on the table every day, consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. And to those that already support us there, I'll see you on the Discord. Let me see. All right, I want to talk about Unreal Engine, because this will lead into a pretty big question actually I have about Nova Lake and Zen 6. Chris Rich writes in and says, Epic claims to have made a number of performance improvements in Unreal Engine 5.5 and 5.6, particularly around increased parallelism. Matt, have you seen significant performance improvements in your games? Is it just an improvement on the CPU side, or has the rendering time on the GPU improved as well? And if so, does that mean you can lower the minimum CPU requirements conceivably? Does this make it easier to develop games that run smoothly? And as a result, might we see finally more complex games with more cutting-edge graphics on Unreal Engine 5 in the future?
Yeah, so I've been testing Unreal 5.6 on two projects. One's like live game, one's the unannounced project. It's much better, right? Like, we're seeing a lot less stutter. We're seeing a higher frame rate. We're seeing better performance. We're seeing they had this fast geometry streaming plugin, which removed all the hitches. So like we're almost hitch free, right? And so after playing a bunch of games like Cyberpunk and all these other games that have a lot of hitches, it's a lot better. Now there are some trade-offs. So there's a kind of trend Unreal's doing in 5.6 where they're trying to do this double upscaling concept that I guess Tom can include a slide on it in the edit, where there'd be upscaling from 800p to 1440p with TSR, and then applying some passes and then upscaling again. Right? So it does seem like we may be entering the trend of the most blurriest games imaginable. And I guess I get, this reminds me of Brian when he was on. He talked about how, as an artist, how the game looked was super important to him. As a developer, I can't stand my game looking like a blurry, upscaled mess. Right? So I don't like this trend the way it's going, where we use a feature that needs 100 times the GPU power that we don't have, but because we want to render it over 30 frames in a blurry mess that is now okay to use. But that's kind of my big concern with 5.6 and I guess the new trend. They are adding like MSAA, the anti-aliasing. So we might better use that over TAA and TSL. But there's some good and some bad. It's usually never a update your engine and everything's amazing and great. You just trade-offs. Like some stuff's better, some stuff's worse. I think it's overall net positive. But I do know, at least in modern games, there's this concern over the double upscaling, which seems to be the new trend.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two things there. But number one, the game is running your game significantly better with the new Unreal Engine, right? It feels more, the engine feels more finished, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so there'd be some code in Unreal that kind of slow or sucks, like the chaos code or the streaming code, and they fixed it, right? So there's enough wins to upgrade for us, so we are upgrading. But there's some features available, like if we're looking at like the Witcher 4 tech demo and stuff like that, I think they're going to be using the upscale from 800p, which is like kind of concerning for me. Like you'll notice there's no sharp camera angles in that Witcher demo where they're turning the camera really fast. Mm-hmm. And that's because you'll see TA and blur and all this stuff happening.
So you still think, well, does it need a lot of work, or do graphics cards need to catch up, or does Unreal Engine 5's updates need to slow down so hardware can catch up?
I think we probably need to do a bit of both, honestly. I mean, there is Blackwell, which is bottlenecked for some reason. Like I remember a lot of podcasts you talked about how
CPU overhead would be my guess.
Even though the memory bandwidth was like doubled or something, there's massive bottlenecks. So you got to wonder if we see a Zen 6 or Nova Lake, is a Blackwell bottleneck going to get better, or is it something that's going to stay where it is right now? But yeah, that's kind of one of the concerns.
Let's actually just skip ahead to this thing I want to get to here. Let me throw in this reader mail, this voicemail here from Techno.
Hello, Tom and Alderon Matt. Sorry, that I'm struggling to pronounce that a little bit. If Zen 6, so obviously Tom says that Zen 6 is already going to be significantly above 6 gigahertz. If Zen 6 ended up at 7 gigahertz on obviously quite a highly binned model, let's just say the AI9 695 XT,
whatever they call it,
which would be 24 cores, 48 threads. If it ended up at a peak boost clock at 7 gigahertz, how do you think Intel would react?
And I'll also add on to this question, how excited would you be to see gaming CPUs getting another significant clock speed boost like the one we saw with like Raptor Lake and Zen 4? But I think that's really the question just in general. Opening here, I just put out a leak. I'm not going to say what the number is. I can assure you it's as crazy as you think it is, actually. Matt, just speaking to you specifically, that Zen 6, they're doing 2-3 node jumps from Zen 5, and they might get to a crazy high clock speed with it. how excited does that make you, and how important do you think that would be competitively against like Nova Lake, hypothetically, if Nova Lake had a lower clock, a much lower clock? Although I think it'll probably be above 6 gigahertz.
So I say this as a person that has a 96 core Threadripper, where I'm doing Unreal builds every day. And the biggest problem I notice about the multi-core strategy versus the high clock speed strategy is there's still certain operations that are faster to do in a single thread.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so part of me as a developer would be very excited about a high clock rate pod. The reason why we went with Raptor Lake on CPUs is because they were turboing to crazy amounts. Turns out that kills the CPU and you get mass degrade. But
because that was on 10 nanometer though, not on 2.
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited to see a higher gigahertz part. I think that's going to be great for gaming because we're still bottlenecked by single threading problems. Like there's this meme where you could do the same operation on 96 cores and take twice as long, right? Like depending on where the locks are and the bottlenecks, this could be significantly great for gaming. I think it's a good direction considering AMD's already solved the 3D V-cache problem. So you can imagine like an X3D CPU running at a high clock rate is going to do amazing in gaming, for sure. And probably amazing in productivity workloads. I guess I'm also still excited about Intel's Nova Lake, about them doing a lot of cores. But I'm also not an E-core guy. Like, I just have a lot of problems with E-cores and thread scheduling and bottlenecks, and you spit off a task for your game expecting it to come back in a certain amount of time, but it runs on an E-core and it comes back much slower than intended. So I would prefer the kind of AMD strategy with the higher clock rate, but I guess there's two different ways of tackling the problem.
Well, let me ask this. Dark Side of the Force writes in, it says, how big do you think the normalizing of more than 8 P cores, like maybe 10 or 12 in Zen 6 products, will affect games in the future? Any new possible features that you'd like to implement with this newfound power? And also, how does that compare with having an extra 4 to 8 E cores or something? Those have been around for a while now with Intel. And I think this is an interesting question because from what it seems, right, Nova Lake will go to 16 P cores unified. AMD 12 P cores unified. Either way, we're going above 8 P cores in a unified way. How big of a deal do you think that would be for gaming performance for games in general?
Yeah, I think that's honestly a great idea. I've seen different strategies. For example, Qualcomm has done a prime core where they have like a high, medium, low end core, right? You have like the E core, the bad one, the prime core, and the normal core. That kind of combination does get confusing, right? Like we've seen kind of issues with X3D and thread scheduling and stuff like that. But it being more normalized, I think, is probably a good idea. Seeing the increase is also great. Knowing that we're out of the 4 core market of all these things being in 4 cores is great. It really depends on, like I said, how much these CPUs cost. Are they going to be standardized? Are we going to see them in consoles? Like, is the PS6 going to be using a higher boost and a higher core count? Because I could see game devs standardizing on it more with that. The one that gets me in, another question was asked about this of like AVX 512. And so are these CPUs going to properly support that?
Zen 6 at least will. I'm pretty sure Nova Lake will as well.
I've seen stuff before about how AVX 512 has downclocking issues and certain things that make adopting in games difficult. But seeing the more core counts exciting, but the one that gets me is, are we going to have the right instruction set? And is it going to cover enough CPUs? Because that makes also a huge difference as well.
Yeah, a funny thing I think about as well. Of course, I've already leaked that there will be low power cores that aim to use less than a watt will still technically be full Zen 6 or close to full Zen 6 or whatever. And it's like an idea I've had thrown around from fans of Moore's Law said submitting reader mails recently is there a chance like the Steam Deck or even the PlayStation 6 might just use low power cores? And my idea was, maybe. I mean, if it's less than a watt per core, they're probably strong enough for a console. Why not? But now that I see, like, let's say Zen 6 hits 7 gigahertz or something, is the low power core going to still be like 5 or 4? Like, if it is, then I would think, yeah, there's going to be a lot of products that might not even need the insane version of it, because we're getting so much performance at this point that it would be worth just having like a smartphone level of power consumption in the CPU portion of a console, right?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know this, but the PS5 actually has an ARM CPU in it, and I think the older consoles did this, where they have a ARM CPU that does the sleep mode game downloading, right? So you think if we could get rid of that and just have that be in the CPU or not, with like a 1 watt core, could be a cool idea. You do got to wonder if you need these e-cores if you are boosting so high as well, right? Like if you're boosting to 7 gigahertz, do you need so many cores or do you need e-cores? Like,
well, that's a question I want to ask
get the
you,
work
right?
done and then like not need them, right?
Like seeing Unreal Engine 5.6 finally parallelize effectively. Is there a chance this will help? Because when I see 16 plus 32, which I remember leaking that years ago for the first time, and I don't know, that was 2023. So I'm like, yeah, cool. That's in the future, 48 cores, whatever. I believe it. Why not? I mean, what? I was like leaking at that time that like we're getting 192 core epic. So why not 48 core consumer? But now that we're in 2025, it seems more evidence that it really will be 48 cores. And it might be at the end of next year. I'm like, do we actually, you know what? Do we need 48 cores in 2026 on a consumer system? But I don't know. Like, do you think that might benefit gaming eventually? Like after seeing these Unreal Engine updates? Or do you think like, no, there's no way these games are going to use more than like 12 or 16 of those P cores? I'm really curious.
I could see it benefiting gaming, but the problem I've noticed on the dev side is the more Unreal Engine parallelizes the code, the more bugs we have and the more race conditions we have, right? So we had this issue on Android where they improved the parallelization of the code, and we just get flickering, or like with occlusion culling where objects are just blinking. And it's because they've changed the rendering path so much that, and also the code's so complicated now, we had trouble understanding how the code works, right? Like there's so many operations happening at once and so many threads that I worry about complexity, right? There's a reason why everyone likes one core is because it's simple. You don't have to pass things back and forth. But I know for shader compilation, for example, that we just spin up all the cores and we just try to compile the shaders as fast as possible. So I could see that being an immediate use where we're like, okay, shader comp is much better. Background tasks are much better. But it really depends on if they're standard. Like, are we going to be stuck supporting the PS4 still with the 8 plus 7 gigahertz cores, right? But if we could drop all those and if we could use AVX 512 and if we could have more background processes, I could see it be better. It just depends on like DirectX and how parallelization we can make how fast we can make the rendering code. But it should be possible until we run into a GPU bottleneck, right?
See, wouldn't that be concerning though? Like the brute force approach right now, I mean, it's not like 24 cores is a small amount. Like if you have a lot of devs still writing their code to support PS4, then I think there's just going to be a default benefit to Zen 6 versus Nova Lake. If this is the difference, if you just have, 24 or for most people 12 or less cores at like 7 gigahertz versus Nova Lake over here at let's say 6 gigahertz, and but they have all these E-cores. It's like, I don't know. I think there's going to be half of games that are just like, woo, 7 gigahertz if it can hit something like that, hypothetically. And like the world where you want 32 little cores in the background, to me sounds like a world 5 years away.
Yeah, like I think with 6 or 7 gigahertz, you may add new race conditions or crashes in games that came out 10 years ago that see 7 gigahertz and freak out, right? It's like I expect a bit of that.
That'd be interesting.
But you're like, there's some games like you play Halo 2 and they didn't really do the frame rate correct. If you play it on a modern CPU, it freaks out, and like physics engine freaks out because it didn't expect the frame rate. I anticipate there being some new crashes and new problems discovered with high frequency cores, but I think it's going to be better in games, at least in the short term, right? Because there's a lot of work passing data around to multiple cores, and it's never as simple as you just add new cores and it's just faster, right? Having 96 cores with Threadripper, like, I'm really happy I can compile stuff really quickly, but gaming performance right now is still punishing because I'm running at a lower clock speed. So I can see maybe long term if developers can utilize enough cores, but if are these products going to pull apart where we need kind of Intel and AMD and PlayStation to all do high core counts for this to make sense for games, right? Like, if you write code that requires a lot of cores, you're going to need fallback code that runs on the low core models. And then the low core models aren't fast enough, you're going to have game problems. Like, that's a bit that's confusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And are we going to get GPU bottlenecked again? Probably, right? And that's where it's going to go. It's like, it'll help to a point, and then we'll get GPU bottlenecked, and then it'll be back on Nvidia to do a faster GPU, right?
Yeah, well, that's one of the last things I wanted to ask you about. Is GPUs. I mean, the last time you were on, it was before RDNA 4 came out, before Blackwell came out. It's kind of an open-ended question, but like, how do you feel about RDNA 4 and Blackwell?
So for Blackwell, I'm terrified of my GPU melting and breaking and not running physics and all these things. So I ended up buying a bunch of 5090s.
Mm-hmm.
I'd unfortunately buy them for massively above MSRP, but for the increased VRAM is the main use I have for it. When we're running our game, we like to have a higher spec of VRAM than players do, so we can load more models and load more stuff. But like I said, I think it's okay, but I'm most concerned about the low end, like 5060. Like, remember the reviews for the launch and how terrible that was, and Gamers Nexus is doing a expose on Nvidia, manipulating reviews and stuff like that. That sounds crazy. Like, do they really need to do that? Like, probably not.
Yeah, they're already doing fine. Why do you? I mean, it must just be it sounds harsh, in their blood. Like, they have to be the most aggressive they can ever be. They don't know how not to be.
It really feels like a self-sabotage, honestly. It's very disappointing. The availability also concerns me. Why would you make a GPU when you can make a Zen 6 CPU, right? It sells more, right? What Buildzo was saying. In terms of AMD, I'm happy that we have a card that is like somewhat competitive, and it's available in a bunch of different models. Like I said,
especially the 9060 XT. It seems they made a ton of those. That it's easy to get.
It's unfortunate the 8 gig model is still around and still sold for gaming.
Well, the 8 gig model is selling like 1/10 the sales of the 16 gig. So I think there's something going on here where it's broken through mainstream to not buy an 8 gigabyte card. Like, this is one gen too many.
It sucks that the name's so similar as well. This is unfortunate. But I generally like the direction it's going. But the hardest thing is, like, is it going fast enough where I can use more of these Fluid Nanite features in my games?
Mm-hmm.
Is a concern. And the bottlenecks on Blackwell concern me. And are we going to be stuck with this generation for, like, another 5 years before the next GPU comes out? Like, we're going to be just struggling to get stock for the next 4 years? Like, that's a bit that concerns me as well.
Yeah, I think AMD is going to keep pumping them out. I think they will, especially because they're starting to use 3 nanometer and 2 nanometer, right, for like Zen 6 and even Zen 6. So they're cheaper APUs, 3 nanometer. So at least that's not competing with RDNA 4 supply, in that way. For Nvidia, I don't know. I don't think Nvidia is going to give you too much for the next year. I do think Nvidia is just going to go, whatever, AMD, take some of the stock if you want to. We're over here making piles of money in AI.
Makes sense.
All right. So I have a question, though. 40K Emperor demands you join Patreon, writes, and it says, Matt, as a developer, have you tinkered with FSR 4? It's been easy to get into compared to previous versions, it seems, but how does it compare to implementation of DLSS?
So my concern about this one is we've added FSR 4 to our game, and we've added DLSS 4, and we've added the Intel one. They're taking vastly different strategies. Nvidia this time was like, hey, DLSS 4 is open and anybody can use it, and here's the SDK. AMD is doing this weird, we'll whitelist your game for FSR 4 thing still. The other issue I've run into is there's a crap ton of bugs. Like, they fight with each other. Like, the AMD plugin will fight with the Nvidia plugin. We've had issues where, like, we had DLSS and VSync breaks in our game.
Oh.
And so it got to the point where our game was so buggy with these upscaling plugins that we tried to ship them, our players screamed at us and said, "What did you do to my frame rate? VSync doesn't work, having all these issues." And so we immediately reverted the upscaling plugins to all three of them. And so my main thing as indie dev, I'm just concerned about the lack of support for all of them, especially the AMD one. In terms of quality, I'm happy with how they look, but on the support side, I'm unhappy. And on a bug side, like there really needs to be a standardized API to use these and not add this to every single game. Like if you want to upgrade from Unreal 5 to 5.5 to 5.6, sorry, the Nvidia plugin didn't bother supporting 5.6 yet, right? You're out of luck.
Right. I've heard about this issue. Yeah, with Unreal.
So it feels
and DLSS.
like you're chained to an old version of the engine that you can't update. And for at least the current game I'm working on, I'd rather have no upscaling and have the freedom to upgrade my engine and mess things around than be tied down to all these outdated problems. So that's my main concern.
Yeah. And I was guessing you would agree, a fairly indie-centric take on it, though, too, because when I talk to people like Brian Heemskirk, it's a similar thing of like, well, you know, we're a smaller team. The annoying thing is just when DLSS or FSR or something breaks the game, right? And a AAA, quadruple A, if you will, gaming studio doesn't have to worry about that as much, right? And it's still a huge pain, or it still takes more effort than I think than I know most gamers on Reddit realize to add all of these technologies to a game and make sure they all work.
Yeah, it seems like I'd have to make a really popular game and wait for AMD to contact me. You know what I mean? Like, that seems like the way to go. Like, players yell at you for not having FSR, and then you wait for AMD to support you. But I'd much rather an open approach where we can kind of debug. Like, if you go on the AMD GitHub and look at all the bugs of game developers saying this thing doesn't work, please help me. And there's hundreds of them, and they all go unanswered, right? And so I'm concerned about being like with PSSR.
Mm-hmm.
I can get help I can make a Sony support ticket and say, "Hey, PSSR doesn't work," and Sony will reply to me and help me with like a reply within 24 hours record time and amazing developer support. I can't get that from AMD, right? Like that's the situation right now.
Yeah, well, again, hopefully people will at AMD. Well, I know people at AMD watch this. I'm not going to go into details and how obvious it's become to me, but you'll leave it at that. People at AMD watch this, so hopefully they will see this and make changes or respond to you. All right, I got one more question here. Dave Schultz writes in and he says, "Hey Matt and Tom, as a fellow UE5 dev, I recently had to move from object-oriented programming to a data-oriented design. Why? Because with this, you can actually optimize for the CPU and especially the cache. And besides the now multi-threaded nature of rendering itself for UE 5.6, I think the actual logic could still hold a lot of games back. However, optimizing for things like branch prediction, cache locality isn't really known by a lot of my colleagues or other devs I know. I feel like a lot of people are stuck at high-level programming while having barely any idea on how the hardware works. What are your thoughts? Do engines, compilers, etc., do these need to change drastically to automatically fully utilize CPUs and take advantage of their feature sets like AVX version or their cache? Or do developers need to put in the effort themselves? Or should even the hardware itself be handling all of this on its own at a certain point? Hope this isn't too in-depth. Thank you and take care, guys.
Yeah, so this is something that's actually very true. So some of the problem we ran into was object-oriented programming has like cache misprediction problems, but all the programmers want it like that because it's easier to maintain, and I guess they call it clean code. There's a famous video from someone called Molly Rocket who has a video called the 100,000 line problem or million line problem or something like that, where they go over how to load a website on a web browser, like a millions of lines of code needs to run to even get a result from the web browser, right? So CPUs are getting faster, but the code to run things on is not really that quick. Like if you get, Zen 6 and you have, 7 gigahertz processor and you press check for Windows updates, it's probably going to be just as slow as it is now, right? And so these programming practices really do make a huge difference to the engine. And the engine, they do try to do this kind of thing. But there's a lot of pushback on the dev side because they'd rather the code be slow and more maintainable than fast and hard to maintain, unfortunately, and that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting now that we're coming kind of to the close of this episode, like how much of it keeps coming down to like we really need to like automate what it takes to make a game, streamline the way we do things in games, and get rid of the old outdated ways you do things. If like everyone could just have like a meeting of the like a Yalta conference over like the future of writing games, like we could probably get a lot more out of them.
Yeah, a lot of game developers are fighting over the most non-important thing. I guess they call it bike shedding. But they'd be like, let's fight about tabs and spaces and object-oriented programming and non-object-oriented programming. And no one's fighting about the real problems, right? The good example Molly Rocket talks about in his video for optimizing code, I guess we'll include a link, is they focus on like these principles about the code being clean instead of like the architecture drawing for like Zen 5. You know what I mean? Like they're talking about the CPU and like generic terms and not really focusing on how the CPUs actually work. So we're losing a lot of knowledge on programming generically rather than programming for how the CPU actually works in the current day. And that's kind of the main problem we have with things slowing down.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know much else to add to that, because it's just so funny. Like last episode, like there was this discussion, or maybe it was 2 episodes ago, I don't remember, where it was like, once GTA 6 comes out, maybe that will be what makes PS4 support go away because everyone will upgrade. But then it's like, no, doesn't really seem like it. And it seems like we're just going to have a lot of old stuff we're still going to have to deal with for probably another entire console gen or something. I mean, I hope not, right? And, look, there will be some developers that just throw this away, right, and optimize for the future. And what will be interesting, I think, is seeing, like, I don't know, what like a next-gen Naughty Dog well, we'll get an example. How good will GTA 6 look because they didn't decide to support it on the Switch or PS4 or Xbox One, right?
I really feel like they're going to try to do Switch 2, somehow, right? At least in the future, right?
We'll see. I could see that. I think that's much less of an issue, though, even with all the annoying things they have to handle. Their annoyances, I think that's less of an issue than having to support something with a hard drive.
Yeah, so I think the problem with games is we're hardware insidious. So we're looking at Zen 6. We're super excited for the future. But there's a huge 10, 15-year lag with things that happen. And so it's hard to be really excited in the hardware space when games are so far behind, right? And so you really have to look at those game developers that are willing to say, hey, I don't care if I lose $100 million not supporting PS4, and I'm going to go all out and do this thing. And they make a risk. Well,
let's hope they do. I think that's going to do it for this episode then. I really want to thank you again, Matt, for coming on. I think it's always an excellent discussion that really adds more context and wrinkles to this space outside of the usual, oh, look, Zen 7 is 32 cores. Like there's always so much more, I think, that the community learns when we speak to experts that actually make these games. So please plug yourself. Where can people find you or anything you want them to find?
So you can find us at alderongames.com. And if you have a PlayStation that is dying right now, you can feel free to reach out, let us know, or let us know in the comments. I want to hear, at least if you forwarded your messages about your PS5 dying, I can at least send it to Sony and fight internally on your behalf to try to get these issues fixed. And please join the Patreon and the Discord. There's amazing people in there. There are great, intelligent discussions all the time. And there's a lot of amazing episodes on Patreon, for example, Die Shrink and things like that really worth checking out.
Oh, well, thank you for plugging that for me. Yes, please join the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. There's a lot of people on there. And, I'll say, Matt, you're on the Discord, which you get access to at the lowest tier on Patreon. But, I'm obviously not going to out anyone, but I'll just say there are people who work at AMD and Nvidia and Intel who are in the Discord, and they usually have often really, really, really interesting things to say there. Maybe sometimes after having a couple drinks, I have to say, but I can't say that I'm completely perfect either. But if you want to like join, speak with these people. People are very open. We're very respectful there as well. And you'll learn quite a lot. I mean, obviously I do. And I think actually one thing that I need to talk about more is the Moore's Laws at Discord, because I'm quite proud of the community we've built there that hasn't, like I've seen at a lot of Discords, divulged into some shit posting fest or something. People actually talk about hardware there if you want to join. I guess that's what I'm saying. And of course, subscribe to Moore's Laws Dead on YouTube, ring the bell button, subscribe to Broken Cell Con on your podcast app of choice, and give us a review there as well. And then once again, Matt, thank you for coming on. Thank you everybody for watching and for listening, and have a good rest of your week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Laws Dead. Moore's Laws Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Laws Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Laws Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Carrie No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Laws Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Laws Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Laws Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Laws Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Laws Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Laws Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Jits, Daniel D, Dink, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, MJB1, GZ Ziggy, Toka, Compressed AI Blocks, SNES Chalmers, Jerem Ferrer, Velcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregorius Hacker, Sarcastro, Chris Rich, Evan Dingle, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Samuel Molas, The Boss Haas, Tommy, Chrysantin Ose, Jonathan, Nithra Zink, Amiable Chief, Jake Dude 23, I Should, Jake Martin, Slicky, Gamers Unite, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zoot Taylor, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cake, Stephen Coates, Mark Mitchell, James Anderson, Mark Raidmaker, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sacher, Michelle Pell, Win Wang, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, T. Cottom, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, John Swin, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Digg, Justin Bussell, Austin Haggerty, Joe Fitt, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angema, Joseph Kelly, Slushpa, Him Sagung, Tails2299, Brian Wright, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Alex Vega, Freedy, Michael Cozy, Thalo215, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Kikum, Solarized A, Sprutnik, Brian P, Hudat42, Cornster671, Penta Winta 37 by 73, Al Richard, Omega Doge, State Farm Snake, Mr. Tiger, AI Soldier 789, John Wick Boomstick, Hugo, Onder Kiwi, Penguins Love AI, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nixus Mania, Fred Berger, Rahil G Bulls, Sheriff Lotfi, Smash Axley, Kevin Kuntz, Karim Al Masri, Manolis Ragkusis, Arnold Vakatura, Callan Reichel, Jonathan Harris, Kleinush, Kagani, Johnny Trans, Zubair Ahmad, Angel of Cake, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.